This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. When Erin Caouette, a Southington High School student, learned about the stark spike in violence against the Asian American and Pacific Islander, or AAPI community, she sought out opportunities to study the history of discrimination and to diversify her source material. Garrett Griffin Jr., a New Haven social studies teacher, noticed his students were treading lightly around topics like ancestry and slavery. So he set out to learn more about the rich accomplishments in African history that are often overlooked. Erin and Garrett are both Fund for Teachers Fellows, a grant program supporting teachers K through 12, helping them pursue professional learning opportunities outside the classroom. This hour, we'll hear from them, two of nearly 900 Fund for Teachers Fellows from Connecticut. Plus, the folks fielding proposals for Fund for Teachers discuss the increasing importance of culturally sustaining professional development. Joining us first on Zoom is Garrett Griffin Jr., a sixth grade teacher at East Rock School. Thanks so much for joining us, Garrett.
Thank you for having me.
So what inspired you to apply to the Fund for Teachers Fellowship?
So what inspired me to apply? Myself and two other teachers who are Raina Walters and Kurt Zimmerman, we were discussing some of the things that we were noticing in our classroom. And I'll start by saying that when I decided to get into the teaching profession, I met both of these fellow teachers at our old school. So we've kept in contact. We've since changed schools, but we kept in contact, and we were just discussing some of the things that we were seeing. And basically, when it came to the conversations of ancestry, and I also will say this, I work in the inner city, so I have primarily I teach Black and Brown students. When it came to the discussions of our ancestry, particularly my Black students, they were, it was a conversation that was pretty awkward because oftentimes when we talk about our ancestry, we think back to slavery. And while that was a really important time and it should be discussed, it wasn't the origin of our history. And so we wanted to we wanted to go on a journey and find out how to have these courageous conversations in our classroom with our Black and Brown students. And so we stumbled across, one night we were talking, and we stumbled across the Funds for Teachers grant application. And so collectively we applied.
And how did that inform you in terms of where you wanted to travel, and where did you end up traveling to?
What we did is how did that,
Or just how did that impact your decisions in terms of where would you like to travel and what did you want to bring back to the classroom?
I got you. I think we wrote the grant first. Like, I think we just wrote the grant, and then as we were writing, we started to we knew that we had to go to Washington D.C. to the Smithsonian Museum, the African American Museum. We knew we wanted to go to Whitney Plantation in New Orleans. As we were doing more research, we found out that right here in Connecticut, there was a UNESCO site. And we met a wonderful woman, Debbie Shapiro, who actually commissioned that site, the marker, the UNESCO marker, because right in this state, there's roots for slavery. So there were some things that we knew we wanted to go to DC. We knew we wanted to go to Whitney Plantation. And then along that journey, we expanded and we added some other places.
And tell us about the Connecticut stop. I mean, it's not just a local site, it's local history. And I know that's not the emphasis for the fellowship per se, but did that add an extra level of importance for you? And what did you bring back for your students?
Certainly. The Connecticut stop was fascinating. And we, again, stumbled upon that. We were doing some research. We found a woman by the name of Debbie Shapiro, and I believe she's associated with the Historical Society in Middletown. But we reached out to her. We read an article how she, the work it took for her to commission a UNESCO marker. Middletown has a history. They were actually a major slave hub in the state of Connecticut. And Middletown, if anybody has ever been to Middletown, they have a beautiful waterfront. That waterfront was where slave ships would come in, and they would have a trading post right at the shore right there. So right at the port, excuse me. So Middletown has a rich history. Miss Shapiro, she researched that history along with some of her colleagues. They researched that history, and they wrote up, they compelled a marker to be erected there, a UNESCO marker. So we went there, we interviewed with her and another professor from Wesleyan. And it was just fascinating to just learn of the history, the families, the prominent African-American families that lived in Middletown as a result of, because eventually slavery was abolished. And so out of that came some prominent African-American families, and they migrated all across the state. It was just a fascinating history.
Love a good stumble. And I just want to mention that images from your fellowship are on our website at ctpublic.org/where we live. And can you touch on what did you bring back, Garrett, whether it's literal source material for students or yourself in general?
What I think what I brought back was experiences, stories, stories to discuss in the classroom to empower my students. I remember just being in the classroom when I was younger. My parents moved me from Bridgeport to Naugatuck, which at the time was a predominantly white classroom. And I remember when we would talk about, or when we would talk about the civil rights movement or slavery, and this was my perception, but it would feel like my peers would be just staring at me as I was one of the only two African Americans in the class. And it felt a little bit awkward. And I noticed that my students also feel that way when we start to refer to historical events. And so it was empowering to bring back these stories so that I can share with my students.
I think it was really stark that you mentioned when you think about the history, people tend to link it directly to slavery. And you mentioned it's awkward. It's an awkward conversation to have. And so thinking about the kind of knowledge gap that you saw or the discomfort that you observed in the classroom that inspired you to apply for this fellowship, how has that changed?
For me, it's changed because, at Whitney Plantation, one of the things that just stood out to me, and Whitney Plantation is a plantation. It's in New Orleans. They have the same layout. It's a historical layout, but the stories are told on that plantation from the perspective of the actual enslaved people. So a lot of there was a memorial, and they tried to document all of the enslaved people that stepped foot on the plantation that were enslaved. And so they did a lot of research. They reached, a lot of research went into it, but on the plaque, on the memorial, they showed the actual skill sets of the slaves. And to me, that was really impactful because not often when we talk about slavery, we don't usually highlight, we don't highlight the fact that the enslaved people, they were actually targeted for their skill sets. So when they were capturing the enslaved people in Africa, they were going to certain regions for their particular skill sets, agriculture, their metalworking abilities, and the different other skill sets. And in fact, that what was also interesting is at the United States Capitol building, there's a statue that sits on top of the dome. And the statue is called Freedom, and it's made out of metal. I think maybe copper. Please don't quote me, but that statue was commissioned. The United States government went to a particular slave plantation and commissioned that particular slave plantation for their work because they were known for their metal work. And so they paid about $20,000 to have this statue erected on top of the Capitol building. It was sculpted. It was produced by enslaved people because they knew that they had that skill set. So I was able to bring that I just found that fascinating, because these were the when we talk about enslaved people, these were individuals, these were people who had skills, who had families and things, and they were captured. So I was able to pull some of those stories out and bring it back.
I mean, I find it fascinating too. The fact that you are adding to the knowledge for yourself and your students. And have you seen a change in the conversation with your students so far?
I do see a change. I mean, I hold my students to a higher standard. I want them to understand that no matter where you come from, what your background is, like you can overcome your situation. And so I feel like that message, as I intertwine that with some of the stories that I've learned, I feel like it's empowering for students.
And you experienced this with your co-fellows, Raina Walters and Kurt Zimmerman. How are you all sharing that resource right now?
One of the things that we are so excited about is that after all of our travels, we were able to put together anti-racist curriculum, and it's available for free. It's a free resource, but we were able to put together K to 12th grade anti-racist material so that we can teach, so that teachers can have resources in the classroom. Because again, this conversation is very difficult. It's very awkward to have. And as a person of color, it's difficult for me. So sometimes I know it can be difficult for everybody that's in the classroom. So our materials, we pray that they're able to start that conversation and portray different ethnic groups in a positive light. We talk about, we were able to include materials that highlight Indigenous people. There's a lot of Indigenous people native to Connecticut, and a lot of times we don't talk about that. So we were really like, I am so proud of the curriculum that we have.
I want to thank Garrett for sharing your experience with us. And I want to bring in JHD, who is on the program team with Fund for Teachers. They're also the activists in residence at UConn's Asian and Asian American Studies Institute and a professional learning coordinator with the Connecticut Council for the Social Studies. Thanks so much for joining us, JHD.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. JHD, you've been listening to Garrett's experience. Can you talk about why his fellowship is such a good example of what the fund is seeking to support?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that Garrett started by talking about needs that he saw in his classroom, specifically around what students were experiencing, and the fact that he engaged with fellow educators on creating a proposal that centers on students' needs and their needs as teachers in order to be better teachers in meeting those needs. I think that's the essence of a really great Fund for Teachers proposal.
And I know we are going to talk about this later on in the conversation, but I also want to just ask, he listened to his students, he's listening to, or realizing that there's a gap. Can you talk about how important it is for a teacher to be able to observe that and put that into action?
Yeah, I mean, I think so I was a teacher for 12 years as well. And I think that sometimes in teaching, because there are so many requirements and things that are on your list of to-dos, it can get easy to get lost in that list and think you're teaching content and forget that what you're actually doing is teaching young people. And so I think what Garrett said and what I believe about teaching and what is effective teaching really does need to center students, center their needs, center valuing them and affirming them in ways that sometimes in schools we find ourselves caught up in so many so many other things. I think this is not just a school thing, right? This is like a life thing where we get caught up in so many things on the to-do list that we lose what is the actual reason we're doing the work that we're doing.
We do get caught up in things, and I cannot imagine teachers, especially now, what they have to think about when they create the curriculum. And speaking of which, I think you're also involved with the anti-racist curriculum. Can you talk about that process a little bit in relations to what this fellowship can do for that?
Yeah, I'm on the anti-racist teaching and learning. We have a steering committee, and what Garrett was talking about that he developed with his colleagues is it wasn't like spearheaded by the collective that I'm a part of. So it's really exciting when we hear about all the different people who are doing adjacent complementary work. But I mean, the collective, what we are trying to do is find out all the ways that teachers and students are doing anti-racist work in their classrooms, in their school communities, and support that work. So the projects we have a multitude of projects that we're working on. Like each person on the steering committee is doing something slightly different right now. Do you want me to go into some of those things, or?
I think we can come back to that later on in the conversation. And I do want to mention that one of our listeners, Tom from Manchester, says, I think everyone's history is important, and I try to do my part. People have contributed across the centuries, and this history is for white children as well. And so on that note, teachers are looking for so many different kind of source materials to bring back for their classrooms in terms of history, in terms of social studies. JHD, can you tell us a bit about the timeline for applications and the fellowships? And this is for those who are listening who may want to apply.
Sure. So the application for the 2023 summer fellowship it's already open. It opened in October. Doesn't matter when you submit your application. The deadline is January 19th. So you do have to get it in by that date, but you can start today. You can start in a couple weeks. Start date doesn't matter. We also offer in Connecticut supports for people. So folks can definitely feel free to reach out to me or to my colleague Dale. We're the Connecticut regional team. We're happy to help in any way that we can. There's tons of resources also on our website. We have an online learning center where you can actually look up previous fellowships and find out about where people went and what they were trying to learn and how they were implementing, how they were planning to implement their learning. I think the exciting thing too is like the snippet that you all got from Garrett is just the start, right? He went on this fellowship in the summer and is still going to be, it's like the gift that keeps giving, right? So it's only November right now. I think that we talked to Garrett, and this is what I found with talking to fellows in June of 2023, or even in June of 2024, we'll see how much more has come from this learning opportunity that he designed with his team as the years go on in terms of how it's impacting what he's doing with students in his classroom.
That sounds great. And I just want to remind our listeners that there's more information about the program on our website at ctpublic.org/where we live. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Where We Live. I'm Catherine Shen. Coming up, we dig deeper into the importance of culturally resonant material in the classroom and where Fund for Teachers comes in. Executive Director Erin Caouette will join us. You can also join the conversation too, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This hour, we're learning about Fund for Teachers, a grant fellowship program that's backed nearly 900 teachers where we live. We spoke with the fund's executive director, Erin Caouette, about the importance of professional learning opportunities for educators.
Fund for Teachers is vital because as schools cut budgets, the experts in the building are the ones that are treated like the employees, if you will, that we can cut costs here. But at the same time, the challenges that teachers face and have always faced are the really dramatic, important ones that make a difference as far as an educated populace going forward. We have a lot going on politically. We have a lot going on in society. And there are a lot of important lessons around those things that can be incorporated and help students process through whatever subject that they're doing. We have always believed in the notion that the teacher, as a professional, knows best what they need in their classroom. They know what their students require and the challenges that they're facing. And so they tell us, this is what I need to do, and this is how I perceive my ability to do it if I have these resources. And then we provide the resources.
Back with us to discuss about the program is JHD Jenny Hakala Diaz on the program team with Fund for Teachers. Thanks so much for coming back with us.
Glad to be here.
You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. JHD, these proposals are very much teacher-driven. Can you explain why this is such an important and unique component to the fellowship?
Yeah, I think the what Karen just shared about how important it is for teachers to have choice and autonomy, because they know their students, they know their students' needs, they know their needs as educators. A lot of professional development it's not that that's not considered, but oftentimes, I remember as a teacher as well, you go to professional development for things where there is not necessarily choice, or there's not necessarily customization or differentiation for you as a teacher. And not to say you can't do some of that as a teacher after you attend a professional development, but having a hand in actually creating that learning experience, whether it's tapping into conferences that exist, or you go and do your own field research and design your own learning experience all on your own. That's really essential, because teachers are students too. All educators, we're ongoing learners as well. And it's just like in the classroom with students, the more you have choice and autonomy, and the more you have say in what you're learning, the more it's going to be meaningful and relevant and purposeful for you.
Can you confront the misconception that this is a teacher travel grant program? I mean, when we spoke with Executive Director Karen Eckhoff about how the fund's mission and even application parameters are really deliberate and thoughtful in this sense, can you take us through that?
Yes, there's definitely a misconception that this is a travel grant. And while the travel can be an important part, because the grant does allow teachers to afford things that they wouldn't be able to afford on their salary, the purpose is definitely not that. And I think even what Garrett said earlier about them going to Middletown, Connecticut, right? Not very far from New Haven, and having a really incredible experience there as part of their larger fellowship learning experience. Just, it demonstrates how you can't start with where are you going to go. You have to start with who are my students, what do they need, and what do I need to learn, and how do I need to grow to meet these needs in better and more effective ways.
Well, you mentioned Garrett. That's Garrett Griffin Jr., who teaches at East Rock School, and he took his students to various states around the United States, but also, like you mentioned, a local area. Is there an emphasis on local history, or is it more tailored to what the teachers are looking for in terms of what their classroom needs?
As Karen said earlier, we really trust that teachers know what they need. So in some cases, it is the fellowships that teachers design are local. And in other cases, teachers will go all the way around the globe. So it's really dependent on what they need to learn. And sometimes it involves going far away to learn those things. Like sometimes we have teachers who travel to parts of the world, but don't do it to go on vacation, they do it because they have students that are from that part of the world, or they have created a partnership with a school in that part of the world that relates to learning that they're doing with their students in their classroom. So there's lots of reasons for teachers to stay close to home or to go far away. But again, the best fellowships are ones where it goes back to centering students.
Karen also mentioned that the fund is working to mentor fellows from underserved communities and also with fellows who, she said, more closely resemble the communities we're trying to reach. What have you observed in Connecticut on this front so far?
Well, I've had the privilege of being a part of that work in supporting specifically applicants of color, so teachers of color who, for many reasons, our systems in our society at large have not supported their survival and their thriving. And so some of the work that to some people might seem very small but is very significant that I've had the fortune of being a part of has been working on creating this network of fellows of color supporting applicants of color. And it's as simple as connecting people who don't know each other to talk about things that they want to learn and grow in as a teacher. So having a 1-hour Zoom session for teachers who have never met each other to get the chance to get together and support each other. So that's what I've mostly been doing in that effort. There's also been partnership building with different teacher of color organizations across the United States as well. And we're always thinking about both the individual as well as the systems. What are the things that we need to do on all these different levels to make sure that this is a fellowship that all teachers feel is actually for them. So yes, we're always looking for more ways and more ideas for how to implement that. And some of the best ideas that we've gotten have been from fellows themselves, right? About what helped them come up with their idea, what helped them get the application in, and then what's helped them beyond the actual summer fellowship to continue to grow and learn and build out their community and their network of people.
Can you give us a sense of the wide variety of fellowships you've seen that are good examples of culturally sustaining professional learning?
Sure. I mean, there's whether a fellow would label it as culturally sustaining teaching using that terminology or not. Again, if we're talking about the fundamental thinking behind culturally sustaining teaching, it's that it's the teaching is centered on the students who are in the classroom with you. So you are ongoing working to build relationships with them, get to know them so that you're able to value and affirm them and what they bring to the classroom, so that there's this deep connection between the family and community education that they are getting outside the school building with the education that they're getting in the school building in a way that currently our many of our systems don't create that connection, right? They actually disconnect to those and value school or formal education as education with a big E, as like that's the education that we should value. But that's not what CST or culturally sustaining teaching is about. So just to provide a little bit of definition around it. But I've seen so many great examples. An example would be we had a group of educators, so this wasn't in Connecticut, in Colorado, decide that they wanted to learn more about how their students got to Colorado. They had a large number of students who come from Mexico, and part of their fellowship was actually taking the journey that their students had taken to get to their community in Colorado. So they actually took the bus that their students had taken and went and met with their students' families in Mexico. And so they had this opportunity over the summer to build deeper understanding of their students and their families and what mattered to them and their life experiences. So the level of empathy that they had and understanding of their students' was just massively increased by that experience. Another example is we've had teachers who have gone to do homestays and gone to visit places where their students and their families used to live, where they originated from. So we've had them go, oftentimes also with the intention of developing stronger language skills in the language that is the first language or the dominant language of students and their families. And so we've had teachers do things like that. We've also had teachers, talk to their students to find out more about them and design all kinds of different fellowships. I feel like the number and the types of fellowships, there's so many, because I think too, one of the misunderstandings about culturally sustaining teaching is often people think that it's boxed to race and ethnicity, and culture is much. It's a much larger word than that, and so that's one thing that I know a person called in earlier from Manchester and was mentioning that they have white students, and we have quite a few white students across Connecticut in schools. So thinking about culture as in all the different intersections of identity that we need to consider, I think is really important when thinking about how do I center students and affirm them. We need to think about all the many identities and communities that our students are a part of when we're thinking about culture.
Thank you so much for that thought. We're going to go to a quick break, but coming up, we hear from a local teacher and fellow who was inspired to learn more about anti-AAPI discrimination. You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Joining us now to discuss her experience with Fund for Teachers is Erin Caouette, who teaches English at Southington High School. Thanks, Erin, for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And still with us is JHD Jenny Hekla Diaz on the program team for Fund for Teachers. You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Erin, what grades do you teach, and how long have you been at Southington High?
So I've been at Southington High. This is my 6th year here, although it's my 23rd year teaching. And here at Southington High School, I teach 10th and 12th grade.
And what inspired you to apply for a fellowship?
So I knew that I wanted to apply for a fellowship. My district has encouraged and supported us through the years, and I've had friends who've applied for the fellowship. And so I knew I wanted to. And so then I started to think about, well, what direction do I want to go with this? And noticed as you couldn't possibly not notice, the increase in violence against people from the AAPI community. So that's what got me started in planning to write the fellowship, write the grant.
I think there were teachers in classrooms that noticed a conversation or a lack of conversation in regards of what you were just talking about. Was that something that you saw in the classroom, and did that impact your decision to apply?
So I in some ways I saw it in the classroom and with some of my students, but more I was thinking about how I could grow as a teacher in order to bring that growth and understanding back to my students. I thought about that when Garrett was talking, and he was talking about that these conversations about race and culture are difficult to have. I know that sometimes I feel nervous to have these conversations. I'm afraid to ask the wrong thing. I'm afraid to say the wrong thing. And so I wanted to make sure that I understood my students and I was able to have these conversations with them.
And so obviously you got the fellow, and tell us about your experience in California and Washington State. What did you do
Great.
there?
We went to California and we went to Washington. And so we started in LA, and so a couple different things there. We started we saw some evidence of the result, the reaction to the violence against people in terms of like memorials and things like that. There was in Little Tokyo, there was this tree of hope where people were leaving messages of hope for the Japanese community. And then we went to the Japanese American National Museum in LA. And one of the exhibits that really stood out to me the most was this exhibit called the Interactive Story File of this gentleman named Lawson Ichiro Sakai. Please forgive me if I've mispronounced that. And he was, he served in the U.S. Army during World War II. And so what they did was they asked him a bunch of questions and recorded his answers. And then this was like a virtual exhibit of him responding to your questions. So you could ask him virtually anything. This video of him, and he would respond to your questions. So as I said, he served in the U.S. Army during the Second World War, but before that, his family, after the Pearl Harbor attack and the subsequent detention camps that were formed, they were forced to leave their home in California. They relocated for a time to Colorado, so they were not subject to incarceration, thankfully. But then that prompted him to join the Army. And so he talks about his experience in terms of the Second World War and the detention camps. He talks about his experience with that in these videos.
It sounds like you had a really rich experience just being in LA. So what did you take back to the classroom from that experience, whether it's literal source material or just experience to share with your students?
So, I mean, I know a lot more about the history and of Asian Americans in the U.S. And because of that, I feel like when I'm talking to students, when I'm sharing literature with them, I have more of a basis for it. I just want to talk about a couple other places that I went. Can I talk about that?
Go for it.
Okay, great. We also went in California to San Francisco to Angel Island, to the immigration station there. And one of the things that was really neat there, so the immigration station was this place where immigrants coming into the country came there. They were separated by nationality. And so any people who they thought were of Asian descent were sort of separated out. And they found these poems written in Chinese on the walls for people in there writing about their experience. And I thought that was really, really neat. I also went to the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle. And there was a great exhibit called Where Beauty Lies. And it explored the history of beauty expectations in the Asian American community. That really, really touched me. So in terms of what I'm doing with this coming back, I was thinking about what Jenny said about this sort of being twofold. So I've gone there, I've learned all of this. I was able to buy a bunch of books to bring back to my students. And now comes like the second part, the next part of what we'll work on, which is trying to incorporate some of these books into and get these books into the hands of my students. So I'm doing that right now via a book club I'm doing with a group of kids. I'm actually I have two daughters. One of my daughters came with me on this trip. But my younger daughter, who's in third grade, I'm going into her third grade classroom to teach a lesson on one of the picture books that I chose. I'm also hoping to work with, we have a Chinese club here at Southington High School. I'm hoping to work with them and the Multicultural Student Union to work on a project regarding identity.
Actually, on that note, really quickly, because we only have about a minute left, I just want to bring the conversation back with JHD. Would you mind responding to what Erin has shared with us and why her fellowship is also a great example of what the fund offers?
I mean, I think it goes to what I was saying about how to continuously grow, right, as a teacher, and think about what do you need to better work with your students. So, I mean, Erin talked about that right there. And I think the fact that it really isn't just about this summer fellowship learning experience, but because we asked teachers to write in their proposal, what are you going to do with this, right? How are you going to implement it? And I'm sure in just about every teacher's case that I've ever seen who's become a fellow, they don't come back and do exactly what they wrote in their proposal because they think of more and more opportunities to partner and grow and share what they have learned and experienced.
Well, thank you so much to Erin Caouette, who teaches English at Southington High School, and JHD, who is on the program team with Fund for Teachers. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Katie Pellico. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much for listening.